The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of rust-colored sand and jagged rock formations that seemed to claw at the pale morning sky. Elizabeth Thornton had been running for 3 days now, her once pristine traveling dress torn and stained with dust and desperation. The daughter of railroad magnate Harrison Thornton had never known hunger, had never felt the sting of blistered feet or the terror of complete isolation until she fled her father's estate in the dead of night, escaping a marriage arrangement that would have condemned her to a lifetime of misery with a man whose cruelty was whispered about in every parlor from Boston to San Francisco. She stumbled over a rock, catching herself with trembling hands against the weathered wood of what appeared to be an abandoned wagon. The canvas top had long since rotted away in places, flapping like ghostly wings in the hot breeze. Elizabeth's vision blurred with exhaustion and dehydration. She had lost her horse 2 days ago when the animal had spooked at a rattlesnake, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather purse containing jewelry she'd hoped to sell for passage to anywhere her father couldn't find her. The wagon offered shade, at least. Elizabeth pulled herself up into the bed, finding it surprisingly intact despite years of abandonment. There were remnants of someone's life here, a moth-eaten blanket, a rusted tin cup, the skeleton of dreams that had died in this unforgiving landscape. She curled into the corner, pulling the dusty blanket around her shoulders despite the heat, seeking some small comfort in its weight. Her eyes closed almost immediately, her body surrendering to exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. She dreamed of her mother, dead these past 5 years, whose gentle hands had once braided her hair and whose soft voice had read her stories of adventure and romance. In the dream, her mother was warning her about something, but the words were lost in a wind that howled like wolves. "The sound of beats walker." Elizabeth's eyes snapped open, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she thought it might break through. Had her father's men found her already? She pressed herself further into the corner of the wagon, hardly daring to breathe, watching through a gap in the wooden slats as a lone rider approached. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a hat with a wide brim that shadowed his features. His coat was the color of dried earth, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man who belonged to this harsh land. Elizabeth watched as he dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud that seemed unnaturally loud in the desert silence. He approached the wagon slowly, and she could see his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "I know you're in there," he called out, his voice rough but not unkind. "Saw your tracks leading up to the wagon. No point eating now." Elizabeth said nothing, her mind racing through her limited options. She had no weapon, no strength left to run, and nowhere to run to even if she could. She was at the mercy of this stranger, whoever he might be. The cowboy came around to the back of the wagon, and for the first time Elizabeth saw his face clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent more time squinting into distances than most men did in a lifetime. There was a scar along his jawline, a thin white line that spoke of violence survived. "Please," Elizabeth managed to whisper, her voice cracking from thirst. "Please don't send me back." The cowboy's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. He looked at her more carefully now, taking in her expensive dress beneath the dirt, the quality of the fabric, the way she held herself despite her obvious distress. He could see she wasn't a common traveler who'd lost her way. This was someone running from something or someone. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no immediate harm. "I'm not sending you anywhere, miss. Name's Cole Mitchell. I've got a ranch about 10 miles west of here. Been tracking a lost calf and saw your footprints." He paused, studying her pale face and cracked lips. "When's the last time you had water?" Elizabeth tried to answer, but her throat was too dry. She just shook her head weakly. Cole reached for his canteen immediately, moving closer to the wagon. "Easy now," he said softly. "Small sips. Not too fast or you'll make yourself sick." He helped her drink, one hand supporting the canteen while the other steadied her trembling fingers. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. Elizabeth fought the urge to gulp it down, following his instructions to take only small amounts. When she'd had enough, he pulled the canteen away gently and capped it. "What's your name?" he asked, settling back on his heels to give her space. "Elizabeth," she answered, then hesitated. "Just Elizabeth." Cole nodded, understanding written in his expression. "Just Elizabeth it is, then. You got people looking for you, I'm guessing." She nodded, tears suddenly welling in her eyes despite her attempts to maintain composure. "My father. He wants to force me to marry a man who—" She couldn't finish the sentence, shame and fear choking the words before they could form. "Say no more," Cole interrupted quietly. "I've got 2 sisters. I know how some men can be, and I know how some fathers care more about business deals than their daughter's happiness." He stood, dusting off his hands on his worn trousers. "You can't stay out here, Elizabeth. The desert will kill you quicker than any arranged marriage. But I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to do." Elizabeth stared at him, trying to gauge his sincerity. In her experience, men always wanted something, always had an angle. Her father had taught her that, even if he hadn't meant to. "Why would you help me?" Cole shrugged, a slight smile touching his lips. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because my mother raised me better than to leave a woman stranded in the desert. Because I've got a spare room and my housekeeper Maria makes enough food to feed half the territory." He extended his hand to her. "Come on. Let's get you somewhere safe, and then you can figure out what comes next." Elizabeth looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Everything she'd been taught about propriety and proper behavior said she shouldn't trust a stranger, shouldn't go anywhere with a man she didn't know. But those same rules had nearly trapped her in a nightmare, and sometimes survival meant breaking the rules you've been raised to follow. She took his hand. Cole helped her down from the wagon, his grip steady and strong. Elizabeth's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, 3 days of running and hiding having taken their toll. Without a word, Cole caught her elbow, supporting her weight. "Can you ride?" he asked. Elizabeth nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. She'd ridden plenty back home, but always on well-trained horses with proper saddles and stirrups, always with grooms standing by. This would be different. Cole's horse was a sturdy roan gelding with intelligent eyes. He helped Elizabeth mount first, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins. "Just lean back," he said quietly, close to her ear. "I've got you." As they rode away from the abandoned wagon, Elizabeth felt something shift inside her chest. For 3 days she had been running on pure terror and determination, convinced that every sound was her father's men coming to drag her back to Boston, back to a future that felt like a slow death. But now, with the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her and Cole's solid presence at her back, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. They rode in silence for a while, the desert landscape slowly changing around them. The harsh, barren rock gave way to scrubland dotted with sage and mesquite. In the distance, Elizabeth could see mountains rising like purple shadows against the sky. Birds she couldn't name called out to each other, their songs strange and wild. "You'll be safe at the ranch," Cole said eventually, breaking the comfortable quiet. "Maria's been with us for 20 years. Lost her own daughter to fever a long time back, so she tends to mother anything that crosses our threshold. Fair warning, she'll probably try to feed you enough for 3 people and fuss over your torn dress." "Us?" Elizabeth asked, latching onto the word. "Me and my younger brother, Jack. He's 17, thinks he knows everything about ranching after just 2 years of working it seriously. Good kid, though. Smart." There was affection in Cole's voice, warmth that surprised Elizabeth. "Our parents died 6 years ago. Pa had a bad heart, went in his sleep. Ma followed him 3 months later. Some people said she died of a broken heart, but I think she just decided she'd rather be with him than without him." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth murmured, meaning it. Despite everything her father had done, at least he was still alive. She couldn't imagine losing both parents so close together. "It's all right. We've made our peace with it." Cole adjusted his grip on the reins as they navigated around a cluster of rocks. "What about your mother? She know you ran. She died 5 years ago. Pneumonia." Elizabeth's voice was flat, the grief still sharp even after so much time. "My father changed after that. Or maybe he was always this way and she just helped hide it. He started making deals, arrangements, treating me like property to be traded for business advantages. Cole said nothing for a moment, but she felt his arms tighten slightly around her, a gesture of comfort rather than constraint. No one's property out here, Elizabeth. In the West, people care more about what you can do and who you are than who your father is or what name you were born with. It's not perfect, but it's freer than a lot of places. The ranch appeared gradually, materializing from the landscape like something from a dream. It was smaller than Elizabeth had expected, but well maintained, with a sturdy house built from local stone and timber, several outbuildings, and corrals containing horses and cattle. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see washing hanging on a line, snapping in the breeze like white flags of surrender. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was solidly built with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a bun, and her face creased into lines of immediate concern when she saw Elizabeth's condition.
Cole Mitchell, what have you brought 'em now?
Maria called out, her accent carrying the musical lilt of her Mexican heritage. First it was that three-legged dog, then those orphan goat kids, and now a girl who looks half dead. Found her in Old Man Patterson's abandoned wagon, Cole explained, dismounting and then helping Elizabeth down. She swayed on her feet, and Maria was there immediately, strong arms catching her. Dios mío, she's burning up with fever, Maria pronounced, one work-roughened hand pressed against Elizabeth's forehead. How long has she been out there? 3 days, Elizabeth managed to answer.
May before. I lost track.
Maria clucked her tongue disapprovingly, already steering Elizabeth toward the house. Inside, Mija. You need water, food, a bath, and a bed, in exactly that order. Cole, you bring fresh water from the pump. And find some of your mother's old dresses in the trunk upstairs. This one's torn beyond saving. Elizabeth found herself being gently but firmly guided through the front door into a house that smelled of bread and coffee and something savory cooking on the stove. The interior was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful woven blankets draped over chairs. Photographs lined the mantel above the fireplace, frozen moments of a family that no longer existed in its complete form. Maria settled Elizabeth into a chair by the kitchen table and pressed a cup of cool water into her hands. Drink slowly, she instructed, just as Cole had earlier. Then you'll tell me your story, and we'll figure out what to do. Over the next hour, Elizabeth found herself being cared for with a tenderness she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. Maria helped her bathe in a copper tub filled with warm water, washing away days of dust and fear. She dressed Elizabeth in a simple blue cotton dress that had belonged to Cole's mother, a garment that fit surprisingly well despite Elizabeth being slightly taller than the woman it had been made for. Finally, with her stomach full of Maria's stew and fresh bread, Elizabeth sat wrapped in a quilt by the fireplace while Cole and Maria listened to her story. She told them everything: her father's railroad empire, the arranged marriage to Marcus Pemberton, a man 20 years her senior with a reputation for violence toward his previous 2 wives, both of whom had died under suspicious circumstances. She described her escape, the bribed stable boy who'd saddled a horse for her, the desperate ride into unknown territory, losing her horse, and finally collapsing in that abandoned wagon. When she finished, silence fell over the room. Cole sat with his elbows on his knees, his expression dark. Maria had tears in her eyes. "You're safe now," Cole said finally, and the words carried the weight of a promise. "Your father doesn't know where you are, and even if he figures it out eventually, he'll have to go through me to get to you." "But I can't stay here forever," Elizabeth protested, though part of her wanted to. "I have no money, no skills.
It'll be a burden."
Maria laughed at that, a rich warm sound. "A burden? Mija, do you know how much work there is on a ranch? There's cooking, cleaning, mending, tending the kitchen garden, feeding the chickens, making cheese and butter. If you're willing to learn and work, you'll earn your keep 10 times over. And if you want to leave eventually," Cole added, "if you want to go somewhere else and start completely fresh, we'll help you do that too. But for now, just rest. Heal."
You've been through enough.
Elizabeth felt tears sliding down her cheeks, unable to stop them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Cole met her eyes, and she saw sincerity in those gray depths, along with something else she couldn't quite name. Because everyone deserves a chance to choose their own life. Because running away took courage, and that courage deserves to be honored, not punished. And because... He paused, a slight smile touching his lips.
Because something tells me you're worth knowing, Elizabeth.
That night, Elizabeth lay in a real bed for the first time in days, clean sheets cool against her skin, the sounds of the ranch settling around her like a lullaby. Through her window, she could see stars scattered across the sky in impossible numbers. More stars than she'd ever seen from her bedroom window in Boston. She thought about Cole's words, the way he'd whispered, "You're safe now," with such certainty, as if he had the power to make it true through sheer force of will. She thought about Maria's kindness, about the possibility of a life she'd never imagined for herself, one built on work and honest sweat rather than social obligations and careful pretense. For the first time since her mother's death, Elizabeth felt like she might actually have a future worth living. Whatever came next, whether her father found her or she managed to disappear completely into this vast western landscape, she would face it not as a piece of property to be traded, but as a woman who had chosen her own path. And somehow, she knew that the cowboy who'd found her in that abandoned wagon would stand beside her, would keep his promise of safety not through force but through simple, steadfast presence. The desert wind whispered against the windows, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings, and Elizabeth finally, truly slept.